Okay, so welcome everyone to the BikeFit Expert discussion. This month we will be discussing about the foot and pedal overview, the importance of bike fitting when we are talking about shoes, about cleats, about pedal. So my guest or my co-host today is Eric Morin. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much. And we've picked a nice, easy, short topic today.
Why
Just
why do
kidding.
you why do you yeah. I was like it may not be that easy, but I think
It's not.
after 30 years of working bike fitting, I guess it's easier for you than with my 8 years of experience. So
Hmm.
I can't wait to hear you about this interesting topic. So the first question we might try to answer is why is the pedal and foot interface so important to cyclists? We know that many cyclists coming in clinic have most of them have saddle issues sometimes, but one of the very common question when cyclists coming bike fitting is, I feel this. The cleat is not perfectly aligned. I feel this discomfort in my shoes. And do I have leg length discrepancy? Do I have the same the same fit on both cleats? So tell us more about why is this foot pedal so important to cyclists?
Well, when we talk about clinically, when we talk about the vast majority of people we see who are more recreational riders, um, their challenges that they have include pain and numbness at their foot. And so that's probably the most important piece of it is that we have to think about what's causing that pain. Is it a bike fit issue? Is it a pedaling skill issue? Is it something anatomical that's causing this numbness or pain? And certainly the components of numbness and pain are either vascular or neurological. And so, from a clinical standpoint, it's very important that we ask our clients some very I'd say from an experienced clinician standpoint,
Yes.
very demonstrate the questions would demonstrate, is this a vascular thing or a neurological thing. So from a physio standpoint or a physical therapy standpoint, is it burning pain, is it just pain, are things going
Yeah.
to sleep, is your foot going to sleep, which toes, how much of the foot, etc.
So the first thing to ask for people to ask themselves if they have foot problem is really what is the type of pain. This is something we are very um, we do on a daily basis as a physical therapist. So we ask if it's burning, if it's numbness, but can you easily wrap the cyclist head around is it vascular or which type of pain is which problem compared to vascular or nervous?
Yeah, good question. The nerve irritation is more maybe specific toes, so maybe it's just one or two toes, where vascular tends to be more the whole foot. And with vascular, if you cut off blood supply, you can get numbing and altered sensation, but also you'll get what's considered ischemic pain, where ischemia is without oxygen. So if you're cutting off blood supply to the foot will become uncomfortable and painful just because of the lack of oxygenated blood. Neurological pain will be, again, more discrete, specific areas. A most common neurological irritation for the cyclist is metatarsalgia or some sort of neuroma type pain. This neuroma type pain can be like it hurts badly at toes 2 and 3 or toes 3 and 4.
With that subject in mind, I think it's the right time to ask you about we will come back to this later, but really briefly about the width of the shoes. I think this is a common issue with the cycling industry trends toward very narrow shoes. It's always like the pendulum. You always say it sometimes go back to too narrow, and then it comes back to a much wider toe box in the shoes. What did you observe in terms of trends when we talk about the width of the toe box in the cycling industry in the shoes?
Well, I think in general there's more brands offering a wider option. Traditionally, cycling shoes have been narrow, and traditionally people have been instructed to get shoes such that they're tight. That really historically was based on the fact that shoes were leather. And back in the day, back when I was a youth, shoes were leather, and you'd buy them tight with the expectation that they'd expand or stretch. Shoes these days don't expand and stretch, so if you buy them on the tight side, they're going to stay tight and most likely cause you foot problems later on. So when we talk about trying shoes on, the best piece of advice is find a shoe that fits or it has comfortable your ability to wiggle your toes and not having overly pressure. The exception to that might be for our track cyclists who are doing events that are very short, and they don't need to be on the bike for more than 20 minutes.
And here's the question, the $100 question. What do we answer to cyclists coming in clinic that they have the thinking that if they are able to move their toes in the toe box of the shoes, they will lose power? This is always on the mind of cyclists, competitive cyclists coming in clinic. It's like, how do I avoid losing power while pedaling? So what do you answer to the cyclists who ask themselves, will I lose power if the shoes is not tight enough in the front foot?
Well, to be fair, the foot shouldn't be floating around, but if we think about the scenario where a person becomes painful at their foot because the shoe is too small, the second you start generating pain, you become limited with your willingness to push into the pedal. Yeah. Now, when we talk about our cyclists who are convinced that they have to have a very tight shoe, that's most likely based on the bias they're carrying forward from what they've heard. So really, the bottom line is if your foot is becoming painful and uncomfortable such that you don't want to push down on the shoe into the pedal, then it's not a performance enhancement. And so again, back to my comment about our track cyclists, it's okay for them to be a little on the tight side, but their events, like say a track sprinter, if we think about their track sprinting events, it's a kilometer, it's 200 meters, it's maybe 3 or 4 laps around the track trying to get up to 42 miles an hour. And it's just a very short period of time. It's not a 3-hour, 5-hour road ride where your foot's going to swell and expand, which will cause even greater problems with regards to a smaller shoe.
That's a good answer. I think I'm always struggling explaining the fact that comfort and performance, they come together instead of, they are not on the opposite of the spectrum. And if we can achieve something today is just open the cyclist's mind to the fact that being comfortable will allow you to increase your training, to increase your recovery, and ultimately to be able to perform as best as you can. So and to that point, we're not asking that these people who are on the performance side have the ability. It's not like water beds in your shoes, big sloppy tents for shoes. It's shoes that fit well and shoes that allow for blood flow and space for the nerves. And if that is allowed, then it allows you to do the training that's required for higher performance cycling. All right. if we come back to the slide, the first
Yes.
the first point you mentioned when we were preparing this discussion is the leverage and the weight. So can you help us wrap our head around the fact that what is the pedaling efficiency?
Yeah, so when we think about, I put the leverage piece up there. The foot and ankle create an important force couple or a coupled lever of the foot and ankle to transfer leverage or load from the knee and hip into the pedal. So if we think that if the ankle is, say, if you were neurologically compromised where you had a drop foot, so no muscle control of the foot, the second you were to push down from the knee and the hip, we would lose all that energy by the instability of the ankle. So the foot and ankle's ability to become a rigid lever allows for greater force transference from the knee and hip into the pedal. That being said, when we think about our pedaling efficiencies, historically you talk about cadence as being an important skill for cyclists. Cadences at low cadence levels, heavy resistance, create a lot of load to the foot into the pedal. So there's different levels of compressive loads to the foot based on your gear ratios, how much resistance you're pushing into a headwind, pushing up a hill. That's when our compressive loading of the foot increases to the pedal.
I think it can come back to the fact that one of the most easiest thing a cyclist can do to improve the comfort and the performance on the bike is trying to have a better average cadence through the ride, through the training. And this is something this is really kind of a shortcut that cyclists can take if they are able to work on higher RPM during their ride, thanks to Zwift introducing those red flashing lights when you're not having a higher, a good cadence. So one of the things that we always suggest cyclists in clinic who come in with an average cadence of like 75, 80, is always try to push this a little higher to 85, 90 RPMs, and you can alleviate a lot of pain through different joint, talking about the knee, the foot. So always, I think it's important for cyclists to remember that the lower the cadence, the greater the leverage that you ask from your joint.
There's
as easy as it gets.
There's simple research that demonstrates all that cadence dependent work with regards to load inductance through the pedal, and then consequently up into the knee, up into the patellofemoral joint and into the tibial femoral joint. So those lower cadence, high load increases that. And there's also a nice study that talks about our lower cadence, high load pedaling actually requires greater back strength to create that base of support in order to push down on the pedal. So there's a lot of things that come from that cadence question or cadence issue. And I appreciate you bringing that up, Guillaume, because that's when we'll talk about what can one do to make oneself feel better about their feet. Improving their cadence is a significant value.
Yeah, it's free.
Yeah, it's free.
no bike fitting required. I think it's very interesting for cyclists to try it.
Well,
you may also need a bike fitting.
I was going to say.
Yes,
I was going to say I wouldn't diminish that because there are certain bike positions and bike fits that lessen a person's willingness to pedal at these higher cadences. So, certainly cadence is free, but it's made easier sometimes by improved position on the bike.
All right. So just to finish with this slide, Eric, can you tell us more about what you meant by attenuate the ground forces reaction, and especially the cornering and hopping? This is something we talk about so much with cyclists in clinic. Like, are you able to go to a bunny up, or are you able to go down the chain border? Are you able? So, tell us more about what should cyclists be able to do regarding their technical skill on the bike.
Yeah. So. We talked about the foot and ankle as being a a rigid force transference point to the pedal up in pedaling efficiencies. But the other role that the foot and ankle play is to attenuate irregular ground forces. So say when you're riding along or descending down cobbles or whatever. Tell me more
about gravel bike.
Right. Something when you're riding along something that's bouncy, that foot and ankle become an attenuation point, or they help. It's a shock absorber. So that is, not only do you transfer force, but you also absorb load coming up from the ground through the foot and ankle, and that's an important function of the foot and ankle. Also, with regards to weighting and unweighting, when we talk about technical competencies of our cyclists, when we carve turns, and I say carve turns because it's similar to like alpine skiing. When we carve turns, we're having to put pressure to the pedal, to that outside pedal, to create a nice, reliable trajectory through a corner. So that ability to weight a pedal for cornering, and then also the ability to do things like hopping. I think, Guillaume, when we talk about athletes coming up through competency of cycling, I don't expect just a very basic beginner be able to do some advanced cornering and hopping of the bike. But if you're to be survival of the fittest out there on the bike, you should have some basic abilities to do things like bunny hop or unweight the front wheel to get over an object or a pothole, something that might flip you over or cause a crash. So that force transference through the pedal is an important aspect of hopping and or cornering.
Just to finish with this topic, is there what can we say to cyclists who are worried about the capacity to increase the load on their foot and pedal interface if, for example, they want to do 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers in a gravel? We know that ultra distances are more and more trendy. So is there a capacity of the foot to increase its adaptation through loading volume of gravel, for example, in order to accommodate a foot to be able to be comfortable when doing much more distances or much more irregular terrains?
That's we'd say a training a training aspect that may have limits. So
yes,
as much as one may feel like, I'm going to be able to get strong and be able to do this, and if I just train harder or smarter, I'll be able to tolerate it. At the end of the day, the body has some limits of what it tolerates, and so if you're doing all the right things, you're doing your strength training, you're doing your progression of training well, and you're still not tolerating these load scenarios, then one starts to look at alteration of cleat position, maybe some alteration of the shoe itself. We know that stiffer shoes create increased peak plantar forces into the foot. So we know that sometimes those well-intended super stiff shoes just are not going to be comfortable to feet, as opposed to maybe something with a little more attenuation.
Okay. Now the big question. How do you choose your cycling shoes, Eric? It's always a
color.
Question. Yeah, first color. But really, this is a big concern. This is a question we have every day in clinic about, I need a new pair of shoes. This one is getting old, or this one is not comfortable. So which process do you suggest cyclists to go through when they are looking for new shoes?
Well, I think when one interviews their client or works with the person that they're working with, you always have to lead with function. Like, what are your goals? What are you hoping to do at the end of the day? Is this a road thing, a track thing, a gravel thing, a mountain bike thing? Because that will start or a triathlon thing, that'll start directing you towards product. also as part of the interview is, and this is super important for me, is the whole concept of, what's your health history? What are your tolerances, musculoskeletal, neurological tolerances that you've had in your past? Because that makes me start thinking with regards to widths, closures, materials, those sorts of things, or the ability to adapt a shoe. So that's really how we start and lead.
This can be surprising for viewers who are watching this video, thinking that they will get answers from you and how to choose their cycling shoes, when we ask first, where are they coming from? What is your past history of shoes tolerance, and what can we expect from the future? What we can forecast is mostly is we are available to do that if we collect enough information around
That's right.
Their tolerance with the shoes. So the practice, the function, the goals, and but if we can come back to the width, the length, the heel drop, the retention system, and the sole footbed that we can find in shoes. Which how do you prioritize those for people who wants to choose their cycling shoes?
Yeah, so the priority, as we first start out, the priority really is around what pedal are they using. So are they using an off-road pedal, or are they using a road pedal? Because then that puts us in one camp or the other. And then from there, it's oftentimes, like in the off-road scenario, do you need aggressive tread or not? How long are your events? And then the other thing is going to be foot shape and shape tolerance. So again, I think early in our talk today, I was like, find the shoe that fits, which is very simplistic information, but it's really super important, is finding the shoe that actually fits your foot well. And that's not easily described from manufacturers, let alone people at well-intended shop employees.
Yeah.
Or heck, if you're buying something online, it's
hard.
really hard to tell.
I think it can be surprising to people to learn that there's no such thing as standardization in the cycling shoes industry. So it's unfortunate, but a 42 European size or a 9 US size isn't necessarily the same thing as the 9 or the 42 size shoes in another brand. So it's very important for people. I think this is one of the things that it's way harder to find the shoes online. I think this is one of the cases that you need to go in store, try as much shoes as possible. And from my 8 years experience, I think the width is probably one of the biggest, the hardest part to accommodate a cycling a foot, especially if the person foot is average or above average width. It's harder to find those shoes, but fortunately the trends in the cycling industry understood that a couple of years ago, and they are moving towards larger toe box. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, what I was going to say is, even though they're available on the marketplace, oftentimes shops won't necessarily have brought them in. So oftentimes, depending on the shoe or on the cycling store, they may just bring in what they know are going to sell, and they may not bring in the oddball, we'll say the oddball or less chosen shoe sizes. And those might be the shoes that are really small, like the 37s, the 38s, the 39s, or the shoes that are really large in like 46, 47, 48s. So they may not have those, let alone the wide options. And really what's kind of what I hear from retailers is they're getting somewhat burned because people will come into the brick and mortar, try on shoes, and then go order it for $5 less online, which doesn't help the brick and mortar at all. So they becomes less incentivized to bring in product because they just have people using them as a sizing system and not supporting them from a retail. So with that being said, I please support your local bike shops.
Keep buying in store.
Buy in store.
In store.
I value online businesses, but especially for cycling shoes. I mean, a derailleur is a derailleur, okay? Let's be honest. But the cycling shoes fit differently across brands, and it is so... I mean, if you go buy... Who cares about cycling shoes? Let's talk about like dress shirts. So Guillaume, if you're going to go buy a dress shirt and you come down to the United States, their size large will be a total tent on you, where you might be in European sizing a size large, which would really fit like a medium here in the US. So they're to the point. There are different, even though they say they're 42s, boy, they may not fit like 42s or whatever.
Hashtag go in store.
Go try it on.
Okay, so to keep discussing about how to choose your cycling shoes, I think it's important to discuss about the heel drop, because we see a lot of different shoes brand who have higher difference between their shape. Like if you put the front part of the shoes on a flat surfaces, you see different angle of a plantar flexion that can be induced through the shoes. And this is something that is very less talked about in the bike fitting or the cycling industry. What's your takeaway on the heel drop that we can see from almost flat to a lot of like 30-degree plantar flexion in some Italian brand mostly?
Yeah, the shoe that actually did that the most was the Time shoe. French, yeah. So I mean, that was kind of a very much a classic shoe. And then the Carnax also did that as well back in like the 90s. Then for the most part, that kind of went away. Just from my personal experience with, I can talk about my personal experience with it. I think the shoe with that plantar flexion bias where it's down, forefoot down, heel up, that works okay if you have a normal foot. I will admit I'm a person who has one normal foot and one abnormal foot that doesn't bend so well. And so my foot that doesn't bend so well, that doesn't work. That shoe doesn't work for me. And so it creates all sorts of challenges and problems. I'm not so sure that design feature is truly required. The complications of that feature, of that kind of more plantar flex position, also creates challenges if you're trying to put some sort of accommodative footbed in the shoe.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we want to support the foot or the arch or unload the forefoot in some ways, it's very difficult. Also, those plantar flex biased shoes will also have difficulties in moving a cleat farther back in the foot. So for example, if I have a person who has a reactive forefoot, like they get neuroma type pains, or they've got a hallux valgus or a bunion that's really reactive, or a reactive big toe, and I need to move the cleat back to unload that, those plantar flexed bias shoes they're not designed to bring the cleat farther back. So the shoes that are a little more not like level flat, but more flat than not, those shoes you'll be able to more typically apply some sort of accommodative footbed or corrective footbed, as well as they're designed usually to allow the cleat to go a little farther back. All
right. So that's a very important part, I think, be considering the fact that is their place to move the cleat fore and aft on the shoes. It's a very important thing that we will discuss later. To come back to the slide, I think the retention system that will be choose right now in these days, it's mostly BOA, so a knob that you twist. It's really nice. The downside is probably that people like the sound, so they fit their shoes very too tight because the sound is fun, and sometimes they can stop the blood flow from going in and out of their foot. So this is something we certainly educate our clients with, that during a 3-hour ride in the sun, your foot will need probably some more space, and you need to adjust the BOA accordingly.
Yeah, the BOA has those thin filaments, which this is kind of gruesome, but it's like the mafia uses piano wires to cut off blood supply.
That's where it's coming from. Now I see.
Yeah. So the difficult thing with the BOAs with the filaments is that if the shoe's not constructed well, it can create very finite or very focal levels of pressure into the foot, which can be uncomfortable, and especially as those shoes age and wear. The well-intended padding underneath the BOA filaments will start to become more. It's
struggle the shoes in the foot, because there's a channel created by the rubbing of this mafia design stuff.
Right. So the other interesting question is, like, a lot of our elite cyclists are weight weenies, right? So they're like, I got to make my bike as light as possible. When we think about what's lighter, some Velcro straps versus BOA construct, the Velcro straps are much lighter and can hold the foot as tightly as the BOAs can. The other interesting thing is that BOAs in the recent past have had some knock to them, in the sense that they mechanically fail or have difficulties being reliable in how they work.
I would like to say that at least usually you're able to repair them quite cheaply. So at least there's this option of it's repairable, so it's good.
It's repairable, but when it breaks, it's kind of a pain in the butt. And so the other thing is if you're crashing onto the ground. Now we don't wish that upon people, but the realities are, when bike crashes happen, I mean, if you do hit the ground in just a let's be honest, hitting the ground is bad for you, right? So or slamming into something's bad for you. But if you have a very focal knob of a BOA and you hit it just right, that can be a potential fracture site. Now, I'm not going to say that it happens all the time, but my concern is, like, if I whack that into a rock or hit that onto a hard object, it can be somewhat uncomfortable to my foot. Or I guess if you're sliding along, it can create a buffer off the asphalt. So, I mean, that's the positive, I guess, but it does create a hot spot for sure.
All right, just to finish with this slide, what do you think about the sole footbed that is the insole that you usually find stuck with the shoes that you buy? Usually, in my point of view of the last years working with shoes, it's mostly like thin paper insole, and sometimes it's not enough for every cyclist. So what should cyclists consider when should they buy another insole? What should they do? It's something that cyclists ask every day in clinic.
Well, a lot of times the little insole things that are included in the basic cycling shoe are very non-committal, shall we say, or very minimal. And the reality is you can still ride your bike just fine. The downside of it, is that if you're doing a lot of volume, and you have some instability in your foot could definitely use a little bit of support. And having that support of the foot allows for the decreased muscular requirement to overly stabilize the foot in pedaling. So if we maintain the foot in a reasonable position and it's maybe supported a little bit better, chances are you'll be able to go a little bit farther with better comfort in the foot, and you'll be more likely to do it again the next day. So that's the value.
A minimum of support is always a good thing.
Yeah, it's always welcome, and so these shoes oftentimes don't have it, and so it's something that you can easily add in from an off-the-shelf product. Do no harm to start with, and then if your foot's extra complicated, then seek out a qualified person to help you problem solve your complex foot.
And I think for a takeaway message, this last slide I just put on is respect your foot. You can change shoes, but you cannot change your foot. So make sure that you don't compromise on the comfort of your shoes, as you said at the beginning of the discussion. Is find the shoes that fits.
Yeah,
easier to say than do.
it is, and back to the concept of we're coming out of the pandemic, I guess, but during pandemic time there was a lot of supply chain issues, and so availability of shoes was limited, and for various reasons availability of shoes still is somewhat limited based on what I told you with regards to bike shop trends. It's difficult to commit to that if people are buying stuff online.
I think if you're looking for new shoes, the first thing is do not be in a hurry, because this is something I hear all day. And myself last year, when I wanted to change my shoes, I was like, okay, it might take time to find those shoes in store and to try them on. I need to not be in a hurry, and this will increase your chance of finding the right shoes, especially concerning the issue of supply chain.
Yeah, that's a funny point, Guillaume, because one of the things that, again, I alluded to that I have 2 feet that don't necessarily match. I have 2 different sizes of feet. So not only do I have to kind of calculate in that time, but like if I'm finding shoes of different brands, they may not fit like we talked about. Like I have a 40 and a 43. So sometimes those 40s fit like 39s, or a 40 might fit like a 41. So it totally misses the fit window for me. And so that ability to find one, let alone the availability of those 2 different sizes, and then actually find a shoe that fits, can be a real big challenge. And take the average person. Well, I had a client the other day. He had the same shoe, different year. 2020, 2021 shoe, same shoe. They were different.
Yeah.
In their footbed, and so it created some issues for him with regards to how it fit and functioned on his foot. And so it was really, I'll leave the brand out of it, but as it was marketed as the same shoe, it was definitely not the same shoe.
Yeah, they need to try them on. Buy in store.
Support your local bike. Support your local bike shop.
All right. So to keep going on the shoes topic, can you, regarding the next slide, can you walk us through the different type of shoes and how they differ in? Do it like rapid it in 60 seconds, Eric. Just 60 seconds.
Okay, so flat shoes are basically for flat pedals. So there's no cleat. There's just a good surface area on the bottom of that shoe. It tends to be a little, on those, they need to be a little more of a supple shoe. You don't want the most stiffest shoe for a flat pedal. On road shoes, typically it's marketed towards our weight weenie friends, the vast majority of those. So they're going to be light. They're going to be stiff. And they're sometimes not all that comfortable because of their stiffness. So, but definitely our road shoes are used for the road scenario. You're decreasing your rotating mass at the end of that long lever of the crank, and try not to carry too much up the hill. Our touring shoes are going to
usually just to say the road shoes, they have a triangular screw pattern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So they're going to use our triangle style cleats for the typical road pedals of Look or Shimano. Those are the 2 most used road pedals. Our touring shoes typically have some sort of flat tread bias for either use on a flat pedal or have some recessed cleat for like a SPD or off-road style of pedal. Oftentimes they'll have very simple mechanisms of closures like laces or Velcro strapping. Our mountain shoes are kind of like our road shoes in the sense that they're going to be stiff and light, but they'll have tread on the bottom with a recessed cleat. And then when we talk about the last of the shoe, that's the bottom of the shoe where the cleat's attached to. We have options of carbon or plastic. Carbon's definitely light and it can be stiff, and plastic is maybe a little heavier, but it's not as stiff a shoe. So you choose one versus the other based on comfort. Cost. Plastic shoes will cost less than carbon shoes. If you're going to add carbon to it, add another $150 or something like that. And then lastly, with our closures, we have different closure options. As we said, BOA is super, or BOA closures are super popular these days, and they come on shoes that are, if you add a BOA closure, that's add another $120. Whereas the shoes with simple Velcro tend to be less, or lace up tend to be less cost. And
God,
then there's still...
That was fast, Eric. Really fast. That was good. You made it like 2 minutes. No, it's perfect. I think it's a good takeaway from what different type of shoes are made for, and especially to come back to the first point of the discussion about questioning what are you going to do with your bike?
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, because there's some road cyclists who will benefit from a touring or off-road shoe.
Yeah, and I have another tricky question for you, because I know that many viewers... Yeah, I like that, because you're so good. I need to corner you in with some very hard question, The question is, what you said that you choose carbon versus plastic depending on comfort. It's not all about performances?
It's all about performance for like a very small percentage of people. I mean, really, for like that 0.01% of cyclists.
Do you mean earning a living through my cycling career?
So that's so yeah, but those marginal gains, as much as people love to play that game, at the end of the day, that's for like the 0.01% of cyclists in the world, and or maybe even a smaller percentage. And so really, if your paycheck is not a function of how fast you go up a hill, we have some discretion and the reality is of availability as to what shoe we might choose.
I think
same thing with bike.
There's two things behind that. It's the first thing that if the bottom of the shoe is too stiff, you can increase your chance of having foot problem.
Absolutely.
We know that with studies. And the other thing is that usually regarding the stiffness of the carbon footbed, it's of the cycling shoes, it's always stiff enough to do the power transfer. It's always like, should I go with stiffness index as high as possible compared to like 10 to 12? Do I have like 12 more watts? What's going on? No, I know, but this is discussion that I have every day, and I'm like, I must confess that it's hard to change the mind of cyclists around this issue, that you don't need the stiffest shoes around to power transfer your way through 32 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, it's more efficient as opposed to like a shoe is just dope. I mean, do some.
Electric.
I'm not condoning doping. Don't take this the wrong way, but I mean, there's ways of going fast. Hide a motor on your bike; you'll go much faster than just having a stiff shoe. Yeah. So the thing is, at the end of the day, if your feet are uncomfortable, you're not going to want to push on the pedals.
That's hard. That's so hard to accept, Eric. I don't think I can accept that. No, but really, I know. It's just like we will say it again and again, but people will keep buying stiffer and stiffer shoes that will produce foot pain sometimes, and it's hard to accept that. Oh yeah, you can just go in the middle of the range of the shoes, and this is very good for you.
Well,
I'm not the middle one. I'm not average.
Okay, so let's think about this though, Guillaume. If you have your cleat of the pedal in an average position on the foot, so it's kind of more towards the forward position of the shoe, what's one of the things you do to improve your foot comfort because your carbon shoe is killing your foot?
Yeah, you go like middle cleat position as...
That's right.
Everywhere.
That's right.
But it's written everywhere, so I must do it.
So our traditional cleat position, from what we talk about from a bike fitting standpoint for where we start, is that first metatarsal just forward of the pedal spindle. But for people, like if we're dealing with people with forefoot problems, whether it's a foot instability issue or maybe their shoe is too stiff, how we can lessen their symptoms is we move the cleat back. Now, industry has started moving the cleats farther back, but is that the right answer for just making up for the stiffness? And I would say that's not necessary. It's an answer, but it's not necessarily the right answer.
I think we can view this topic through the lens of a carbon gravel bike with integrated suspension.
Well, that's the other thing.
I mean, it's getting stiffer, so we're gonna put a chuck on it.
But that's the thing is like you've got to get your comfort somewhere because you're only going to tolerate so much loading from the ground. And so what you've seen, the well-intended gravel bike early on was just kind of a rigid mountain bike. It was original rigid mountain bike, the kind that I had when I first started mountain biking back in the 80s. And with the exception of drop handlebars. But what we've seen in the gravel industry is the increase of attenuation because, riding on gravel all day hurts. It's not a comfortable thing. And so you see a wider tire, tubeless tires, you see the incorporation of suspension. It hurts to ride on bouncy things all day.
Yeah. I think it's a very good reminder of the downside of increasing stiffness.
Yes.
Throughout sports equipment in general.
Absolutely.
The body doesn't change that much during this new innovation, so we need to adapt.
That's right. So back to the track cyclists, though.
You love track cycling. You love track cycling.
I love track cycling. But the velodrome is a very consistent surface. There's no irregular vibrations, and your events are super short. And it is critical, like if you're at that elite level, your races are won and lost by tenths, hundredths of a second, where your marginal gains of a stiff shoe are super important. But again, that's like un poquito, just like a very small fraction of our population.
But are you aware? Are you aware? Or did I tell you that the indoor velodrome is finally open in Quebec? It just opened last November,
awesome
so it's next time you come in Montreal, we will go there. It's
I am so looking forward to seeing it.
There's a pump track in the center. There's the
awesome.
It's awesome. So props to Beaumont.
I saw drawings of it. Yeah, I saw drawings of it, and I was super excited for Quebec to have that, and I'll be excited to see it with you someday.
Yeah, I think it will be very nice. I didn't go yet, but it's promising for the next younger cyclist who wants to train indoor.
Your young family members.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Next thing is, how do you choose the right bike pedal? So there's a lot of thing about. First thing that comes to my mind is, I need speed play because I have knee pain.
Well, so first of all, speed play was sold to Wahoo, and so they're no longer speed play, they're Wahoo pedals, right? So, but to that point, there's this idea when the clipless or cleated pedal first came out, there was no float. And so you just put the cleat on and hoped it was in the right position. And so there was this creation of all these knee pains and problems. And so there was research done, and they found that if you put a little float on them, you might tolerate life a little bit better. So
I just want to, can you repeat that so everyone can really grab this? There was no float. What happened?
Well, when there was no float, but it didn't mean there was good bike fit. So people were just putting cleats on in spite of their bike position, in spite of the cleat position, and riding their bike. And because of that, sometimes people would create knee pain. I'm not going to say that just because you put a cleat on your shoe and you pedal on it, it's going to create knee pain. But, a risk factor was knee pain. And so what was found with research is that if you put a little float on it, it'll kind of forgive your irregularities of bike fit. This is my take on life in the world, is that if you, and this is based on me personally, and I'm all sorts of messed up on asymmetries and stuff, but if you have a good bike position, good bike fit, and good equipment, good pedaling skills, good physical preparation, you really don't need much float at all. And so back to the point of speed play, when speed play came out, that was the concept of, here's a pedal with a lot of float. The first speed play pedals were the X pedals, and they had many degrees of float and rotation. And when I say float, it's the ability to rotate either side of the center of the pedal. And there was some people who were like, oh my gosh, speed play cured my life. They didn't say, oh my gosh, good bike fit, good bike position saved my life.
Yeah.
They just threw float at something, and that allowed them to move okay, or find a path of least resistance that improved their knee situation.
I have a couple of bike fitting situations that we can discuss about that, because often cyclists come in clinic and they come with the question that, is my cleat well positioned? I don't feel like my foot is correctly pushing through the pedal spindle. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that comes very, very often is the fact that their saddle may be a little too high, yes, a little too far back. So it's harder for them to push through the pedal spindle, because like the leverage is not well positioned over the pedal spindle. And it's always hard to tell them like, oh, and now do you feel your problem with your foot? And they're like, oh no, you're right. It's, what have you done with my shoes? And you're like, nothing yet. It's just now that you're well positioned over your pedal spindle, your foot. So usually what you just tell, the fact that the bike fitting a well positioned cyclist on the bike, usually they have less foot instability or correction that they are looking to made on their cleat, because it can comes from the saddle. I mean, it's another hour of discussion regarding the good saddle position accordingly to the foot. But
yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a very important fact to know that sometimes they come in clinic thinking that their issue is a cleat position issue, and finally it's rarely just that.
Yeah, Guillaume, and to that point, I'll say, when people, bike fitters out there, bike businesses, physios, whoever, are offering services to bicyclists, there'd been kind of this model of like, oh, we do cleat fit. And I sort of went down that rabbit hole back when I was younger. I sort of went down that rabbit hole, but I found I couldn't, when people would just say, oh, I just need new cleats on the shoes, and that's it. That's all. I was like, no, I need to look at the whole bike. You can't, I would argue that you can't just put on cleats onto a shoe without seeing the person on their bike and making sure the saddle's in a good position.
Yeah.
And the bars are in a good position.
It's very unfortunate that your shoes are clipped in, the saddle is static, and the cockpit is there. So these are very interdependent
absolutely
point of contact. And thanks to you, I never went down that rabbit hole, because you told me not to go. And people keep asking me that service. Like, oh no, right, I'll just come 60 minutes, because our bike fitting session is 2 hours. So I will just come 60 minutes, just that and that. I'm like, it's no. I don't want disrespect, and I want to give you the best service as possible, and I cannot do that in 60 minutes, because then I'll find some other stuff, and I really want to do my job well, so you can be comfortable on the bike, and I must take the time to look at every part. So today the conversation is just about the foot and pedal overview, and teaching bike fitting, it takes a couple of days, and then it takes couple of years of practice. So it's not something that can be transmitted in YouTube video. Maybe 100 hours of YouTube video, you can figure this out, but still you would have to practice a lot and have anatomy and biomechanic background to be able to join all those knowledge together.
And then also I'd also mention the technical background too, you know, like understanding what a person is trying to do on their bike and what the technical requirements are for that person. And so it's partially about knowing the anatomy. It's also having appreciation for the technical aspects of the tasks that they want to accomplish on their bike. So we definitely want to pay or it's due it's due respect to that aspect as well. So it really, when we talk about, and back to the 100 hours of YouTube video, the interesting thing about YouTube video is there's such diverging, we'd say, opinions, and that even if you watched 100 hours of YouTube video, you know, you might be able to come to kind of some centralizing points, but there's a bunch of, we'd say, interesting information out there.
Yeah, we are throwing our stuff into that, and
that's right.
And hopefully there's some interesting stuff to improve bike fitting in that.
Right. Yeah, I think what we're hoping to do is talk about the merits of the discussion so people can better understand that it's not just like, oh, you have to do it this way because it's
the fact that the more you know, the more you come to understand that there's no simple answer to those complex problems, and it's everyone who is working with the human body know that it depends. It always
depends.
That's right. So it's a very humble exercise, humbling exercise. Okay, just to keep going on the slide that we have beside us, there's some triangle cleats that we just talked about, the Look, the Shimano, and others. There's the time, the speed play. What are the specific characteristic of the time? I know this is very, very, very rare that we have those type of cleats in clinic, because it's really in North America. I think there's not much people keeping that in store. What is the particularity with the time pedal?
The time pedal for the road used to be two metal brass pieces that attach to your shoe that you'd cleat in to the pedal. They've since changed it to a more plastic and a little bit of they still have a brass rear piece on that cleat. So it's a toe in, heel down sort of mechanism, just like the other road pedals or the like the Shimano and the Look. The difference is the time or iClick type cleat allows a little bit of rotation bias, and then it allows two widths of stance. So whether, and I always have to think about this, but there's a right and a left cleat. So the right cleat on the right shoe and the left cleat on the left shoe have a certain width of stance or a certain assumed Q factor. And then if you switch them, put the right on the left and left on the right, that gives you a different Q factor. And, you know, frankly, I don't remember them off the top of my head, but I always have to look at the product information to define it. You can look at it and sort of appreciate it, but I always default to the instructions.
No, but I mean, it's common. This is something always happening in clinic, especially with new technology coming through. We are, and you must be, I think it's very important for the client to know that you don't know everything, so you are willing to look into the manual, the instruction manual to find the right answer. So no shame on that. I'm good with that.
Yeah.
I don't know either which difference there is between the time.
Right, because the main thing is we're trying to make the best decision for our clients, and really with regards to part of how we position the cleat is how we create a width of stance based on a person's pelvic anatomy and lower extremity anatomy architecture. So the width of stance and choosing a width of stance is very important, especially on the time where we only have our choice of two widths. We need to make the right decision. Whereas the Look and the Shimano cleat has some a little more variation in your chosen width of stance from the cleat. The time has your choice of A or B.
Or B. All right. So this will be a very interesting part of the conversation about the cleat position, explain how to set up the cycling cleats. There's a lot of information that we can give cyclists, but we will try to go through this in a protocol, like a very discreet. Yes, are we able to do that, Eric? Do you think
yes.
So? Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about the merits of it, but
okay. So first of all, the 4.5 of the cleat. What is going on right now versus what the theory tells us about the 4.5 of the cleat under the shoes?
Yeah, so traditional cleat positioning was such that the first metatarsal head, or the bump of the big toe, was to be placed over the pedal spindle, and that was back in the day with more flexible shoes, and there's some differences in bike geometry. That the practicality of that foot fore and aft position on the pedal decreases the amount of toe overlap on road bikes. And toe overlap is like when you're going 5 miles an hour or under and you turn the handlebars to the right or to the left. If we have a bunch of toe overlap, we'll hit our foot with the wheel. Not so much an issue.
This can be discussed later on in the discussion with the middle cleat position. The toe overlap. It's something very important for cyclists with marginal gain. Usually they race, and if they have a big toe overlap, they might not race very long. But
yeah. So then it started going to. There's some nice research by nice research by Hull, Hull, that looked at optimized positioning just from a leverage standpoint, and it really was probably the foot a little farther forward on the pedal was better, but we know from anatomy that the foot tolerates that levered position to the pedal a little bit better with first metatarsal head just forward of the pedal spindle.
Yeah. So if they can take away something, it's really, you should start with that position usually. Regarding cleat positioning, you put your first, how do you call this part of the foot? The first
metatarsal head. It's the big toe bump.
Just 5-10 millimeters in front of the pedal spindle, right? So you start with that, and then you see what happens, considering that the saddle is at a good setback and a good height.
Yep.
Okay, and then the trend right now is more.
So Joe Friel back in 2004 or 2005 pushed something out there on Training Peaks or something that he did a midfoot position and changed the world, and so everybody started doing that, and for one reason or other. And there's reasons why you would or wouldn't do that. There's some practicality things and impracticalities, but that's getting into the weeds a bit.
Yeah, but I think it's good to remember the fact that if you have a forefoot sensitivity and if the shoes become increasingly stiff, you might need, in consequences of those two, move the cleat forward back because of the stiffer shoes and the forefoot sensitivity. So it's just like you start with what we just discussed, and then you see what happened, considering the rest of the bike fit is doing well.
The impracticality moving cleat too far back is it does start to affect a person's ability to pedal at higher rates, higher cadences.
Yeah, people don't talk enough about the cons of moving the cleat forward back in the middle of the shoes.
Yep. And then also the ability to hop or to
I think
subtly nuance the pedal.
you need to explain the fact about like just the example of being able to jump when you're standing up.
Yeah. So, I mean, if y'all can stand up right now and try to jump off of the middle of your foot or off of your heel, and you don't go very high at all. So if you do a normal jump, that's off essentially the ball of the foot. And that explains kind of that the limiting of that lever of chosen lever of connectedness to pedal. Now our mountain bike, like our downhillers who are using a cleated pedal, they most always have a midfoot pedal, but you have to remember their jumping and hopping is dependent on that suspension system. So when they downwardly load that suspension system, that creates that unloading and hopping that's not necessarily requiring that foot position on pedal. They have the practicalities of their midfoot cleating is that they're also hucking themselves off huge obstacles and 40-foot gap jumps and having to land that.
Yeah.
And the impracticality of having the foot farther back on the pedal, foot doesn't tolerate that well. So the midfoot position, there are mechanical reasons why you choose that.
Thank you, Eric. Let's keep going with the width of stance on the pedal. I think it's a very common issue, especially regarding older and older cyclists with less and less mobility through the hip and stuff like that. I think it's important to let people know why sometimes the width is not wide enough and why sometimes it's too wide, especially regarding some kind of bike like the fat bike and the Kaiser's spinning bike. These can be example of too wide of a width of stance. Why something would be too wide, Eric?
Well, when you take a look at road bikes, they're typically, when we define width of stance, we start out with the bike because a bike has a set width of stance or what's called Q factor. And then there's some adjustability within the pedal itself. So sometimes there's pedals with a little wider or a little more narrow spindles. And then the cleat has may or may not have the adjustability of width of stance. And so when we talk about the total width of stance...
Can I just put numbers on that? Like if
Sure.
we talk about external to external crank arm on a road cycling bike, you will have around 150 millimeters, like
for a road bike.
For a road bike. And then
they're typically 148, but round up to 150,
Yeah. And then you can go up to like 220 on a fat bike.
Yes. So I mean,
so
that's a lot.
It's a 70 millimeters difference. It's huge.
Yeah. And so if you have someone small and diminutive, it means that they're essentially on these fat bikes or these larger mountain bikes. It's the equivalent of putting them on a horse or having their legs way out there. And so if we're thinking about pedaling 200 miles in a really poorly aligned position, it just, something's going to give.
Okay. And viewers can be mad right now because we just talked about the different Q factor of the bike. But regarding the cleat positioning, that's why we are talking about this slide. So why should one cyclist decide to move in or out their cleat if we talk about the look or the Shimano cleat under their shoes?
So the look in Shimano cleats typically have, 5 to 6 millimeters of adjustability. And so sometimes that's a very important discretionary move to improve the alignment of the foot underneath the hip. And so we're looking at adjusting a width of stance of the cleat on the pedal to do that fine tuning of how that leg falls underneath the hip in pedaling.
So usually what we see is, would you say that in clinic most of what you do is give the cyclist a wider width of stance or narrowing the width of stance when you move the cleat in or out? Take a gamble. Let's do it. I think on my side, usually what I do is most of the very normal or wider cyclist.
You're always moving the feet out.
Yeah, I mostly that's what I do. I have poor hip mobility, so usually they prefer to be a little wider on their. I'm talking about road bike. Usually they
Yeah.
prefer to have a little wider width of stance, but again, it's not something that people should try without the help of a professional. But this is something we do more often than narrowing the width of
Yeah.
stance on.
Yeah. So irregular tolerance of width of stance would end up being things like iliotibial band irritations, patellofemoral pain, foot compression. So, a lot of times people who have too narrow of stance from their cleat position
Yes.
will complain about pain at their fifth toe or the outside of the shoe.
Because they are always pushing their foot
They're
towards.
always wanting that foot to go wider. And conversely, if it's too wide, what we'll typically see is we'll see the heels rotating in unnaturally and people kind of feeling like their big toes getting squished to the inside of the shoe, or they're feeling like something's not quite right.
All right.
And so you can see that quite well. I can see that quite easily, but it may or may not be common. But there's typically some questions that we ask people clinically that might allude to that intolerance of width of stance or needing to adjust the width of stance.
Yeah. It's really just to focus out on the conversation about the foot, but it's after 8 years, I cannot imagine what it will be after 30 years, but it's crazy how much you can get from like the initial 20 minutes of discussion with the cyclist. You look at their bike, you have some hypothesis, you hear the story, you heard that story 100, 1,000 times, and you're like, you don't say I know, but you have some pattern recognition that goes on, and you're like, this comes back to bike fitting, and if you see more than 1,000 and 1,000 of bike fit, there's something that start to come back more and more often. So it's not easy. It's just practice.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Guillaume, and you'll continue to have an increased awareness of this, is that sometimes people can just walk in and you look at the bike, you look at them, you're like, don't talk, I got this. I'm not saying I do that all the time, but it's that. When you see that saddle like 10 degrees down, you're like, you have like genitals problem with your saddle. How do you know? Let me tell you what your problems are. And they're like, oh, how'd you know that? It's like, well, I've seen this a few times. But, we respectfully ask people their history. And to your point, Guillaume, there's some very interesting questions you can ask people that really essentially tell you what's going on, and confirming what you're seeing on the bike is a challenge and a problem. And
I think to finish this parenthesis, it's the fact that it's not about the bike, it's about the cyclist. Like people, they care too much about how their bike looks, but I don't care about how the bike looks. Usually when the bike fit is done, there's some stuff like the saddle is mostly level, but the fact is that are you able to use your bike as much as you would like to? And if the answer is yes, you're an happy customer, and I'm an happy bike fitter at the end of the day.
Yeah.
All right, let's come back to the rotation, the last aspect of this slide. Sorry,
yes.
we have a discussion to keep going. So you first wrote the fact that it was a function of posture. When you just said, like, when I see a client coming in clinics, I can look at how he walks and have some insight on what's happening.
That's right. So in due respect to a person's architecture or their alignment and all, so if people walk like a duck, they're probably not going to pedal straight ahead. And so typically we accommodate some of their architecture with regards to, we first adjust width of stance, and then we can adjust a rotation bias of a cleat to allow normalcy of their architecture within the pedal stroke. But how we order these things is we attend to the fore and aft of the cleat first, width of stance second, and then lastly we do the rotation bias of the cleat.
Yeah, I think it's important
all come together.
You need to follow those protocol. You need to go through these steps in order. because you will have to come back and you don't know which variables is which, and then
Yeah.
you messed up
Yeah.
the process.
Yeah, here's the pro tip, the secret sauce.
Tell me.
So ideally, when a person's pedaling and you have them stop pedaling and you've done a great job with their cleat positioning, they're going to have, if you take their rear foot and you rotate it one way and rotate it the other, they'll be right in the middle of their rotation adjustment of the cleat. So,
so they're still float available on both sides, heel out or
correct,
heel in. Yeah.
correct. And so, and that's a real, that's in ways a very simple thing, but it's, at the end of the day, if you've done a great job with their cleat position, they'll have at that 3 o'clock position or horizontal position, when you put their foot in like a normal pedal level position and just take it and just take the heel from behind and just rotate it one side or the other, it'll be right in the middle of that float.
Are you ready for the next tricky question? You're doing good, so I'm just keep on hammering the tricky question. Symmetry. Yes or no?
Of the cleat?
Yeah. Should we have symmetrical cleat position?
For the vast majority of people, yes. And
that's okay.
Here's
I'll go with that.
So bell curve distribution. So our bell curve distribution, there's people who have, the vast majority of people will have symmetry of cleat position. The people who won't have symmetrical cleat position are those with obviously musculoskeletal irregularities or asymmetries. So things like leg length discrepancy, maybe a person who's had trauma to a foot. There's all sorts of kind of weird stuff that comes through, but it's really comes down to your work with someone who knows and can put perspective to the musculoskeletal irregularities or challenges. So I always get worried about people who are less trained on musculoskeletal stuff making asymmetrical cleat positional changes. Yeah. I will say clinically, when people come in, one of my first questions is, who helped you with the position of the cleat? Was this you?
Yeah.
Was this self-inflicted?
How did you come up with that bike fit? Like, where is it coming from?
That's right. Super important, because that gives you insight as to, did they attend to the cleat position symmetry?
And I think it's very important for them to understand that this question is crucial, because usually what I hear from like just another case study, that the fact that, I moved my saddle this way because I had this discomfort, and then I did that for that region, and then you're like, it's all the puzzle coming into form that you're like, okay, now I understand your problem, what you tried before, and why I can move you in the bike fit window range of like you're outside of the range, so I will try to fit you in just at the beginning of the bike fitting range, compared to not knowing and trying something because your body can adapt, but it takes time. So you must respect the rate of adaptation of someone when you do a bike fit.
Absolutely.
Just one more thing, Eric. Just one more thing. No, but the fact that usually when the bike fitting session is over, one thing I like to say is that, okay, this new bike fit is like having a new pair of shoes, and you're going to want to do your training with it, except that you don't have the old one, because I just moved your bike fit. So you must be careful with. I try to rate my my change like on a scale from 1 to 10. Did I change a lot of things today compared to what I know, or did I just put some small changes? And then I say, if I rate like 9 out of 10, I move everything. You must be careful 9 out of 10, because you will need time to adapt to these new changes on your bike fit. So I don't know why I'm telling that. Sorry.
So
this one.
So back to the symmetry of cleat position. I think
that's what we were
for the vast majority of the people, they'll most likely have a symmetrical cleat position. The practicality of that is is that we start simple for the vast majority of people, and that our bike fit journey is truly a bike fit journey.
Yeah.
So the practicality of having symmetrical cleat position is partially that when you go to replace cleats, and people will kind of a DIY or do it yourself sort of approach to replacing cleats, it's far easier to do a replacement of cleats from a symmetrical position rather than, oh my gosh, I have to worry about just like 0.73 degrees of rotation of this cleat or maybe 3 millimeters back. It's much harder for people to manage those asymmetries in DIY situations than to have a symmetrical cleat position.
Regarding what you just said, what
Yes.
would you say to a cyclist who is really picky about his cleat position being asymmetrical, which cyclist doesn't have any musculoskeletal funny stuff going around? What usually would you suggest him to look at? Because in my mind, it's like, oh, it's probably a saddle height issue. It's probably a saddle 4.5. The problem is probably not your cleat. As I said before in the discussion, the fact that your cleat is uncomfortable is probably a consequence of something else going on up there in your saddle.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Other than consideration of psych evaluation, I'm just kidding. Maybe not. But yeah, frequently if people are kind of messing around or like, oh, I have to have this cleat asymmetry, chances are it's something upstream, something with regards to saddle position or something with regards to asymmetry and flexibility. And the question is do you accommodate that into a cleat asymmetry, or do you work on the flexibility piece, or does your saddle need to really be that high? We do know that when saddles go too high, it starts to create an asymmetry of knee angle most extended.
Let's hear it again. It's so important.
When the saddles come up too high, one leg starts to overreach more than the other. And that it's true.
I know.
And so that sometimes creates that, there's been a couple of suggested recommendations with regards to saddle heights. And if you follow it maybe too much to one way, it creates saddles that are too high relatively for most people. Yeah. And then the right leg usually is the leg that stays true to course, and then the left leg overreaches, and then that sometimes creates this feeling of like, I need to change my cleat position to make things feel better. It's
such an important takeaway message. If you have cleat position, just go through your saddle height and saddle positioning. I think you can solve a lot of asymmetry and pickiness about cleat position upstream. It's so important.
Yeah. Thousands of stories we could talk about, Guillaume. We
don't
have time for that.
Yes, keep hammering this conversation. So, addition in and out of the shoes. What should you put in and what should you not put in and out of your shoes, considering wedges? What has been demonstrated as? Let's talk about knee tracking. Come on, Eric.
Well. Okay, so just the plain and simple in 60 seconds and or less.
You do it again.
Yeah, so we talked about this earlier, where the insoles that come in the cycling shoes are typically unsatisfying or not all that great. And so typically we want to have something that accommodates, basic accommodation of the arch. There's things like aftermarket wedges one can put in the shoe, but I think they sometimes unnecessarily take care of issues or pollute the toe box space, so that's potentially a source of discomfort. So usually the stuff inside the shoe is an accommodative footbed that helps support the arch. In pedaling, we start there.
Thank you. That was so simple.
Yeah.
There's other...
back to this idea though that we start simply.
Yeah.
And don't overcomplicate. I mean, we start simply, and if that works for people, great. And if we need something more complicated, we can go there, but we don't start with the most complicated stuff.
It's not good for marketing, Eric, when you say start simple and like nobody is special. How do they feel after that?
Well, everybody's special. Let's
okay, thank you.
but there's some very nice, again, when we talk about averaging populations, there's some very nice stuff out there that helps people have a much better than nothing support of the foot. And the vast majority of people that need like super custom stuff, that's a very small percentage of the people. If you have the money, God bless, buy everything. But you don't have to start there. Yeah. There's some very nice options out there that are very very helpful for most people.
So I think as a takeaway, you start simple, you follow the basic rule of the 4.5, and then you assure yourself that you have good arch support, basic good arch support that doesn't lessen the space in the toe box. Very important. And then
because then it becomes a tight shoe.
Exactly.
We don't want a tight shoe.
We want a shoe that fits, but in which you can have some space for your toes to move, so you don't have any nerve compression or ischemic compression.
Yeah, vascular compression or nerve compression, or making the foot hold a cramped held position, because that's becomes foot fatigue after a while.
Eric, how wide should your pedal spindle be? Because we know that there's a lot of width in the pedal spindle. You can buy different size in Shimano, which are +4 millimeters. You can buy different size in the now called Wahoo Rip Speedplay pedals. So how would you choose your pedal, the length of your pedal spindle?
Well, it's based on the Q factor of your bike or width of the bike, and then the width of you. And so where we're trying to create alignment of the extremity off the pelvis, that sometimes requires a differing pedal spindle width. Now, I will say we're coming out of a time where there was far more options for differing spindle lengths. I think, I can't speak for the manufacturers, but I know there was a pedal called Issy that had a wider pedal spindle. If we look at the picture that's up on there, we see the Speedplay with a longer pedal spindle. Speedplay, when Speedplay got bought by Wahoo significantly decreased the availability of products that Speedplay had offered. So, it's a business decision of theirs.
Yeah.
So you really have, there's some, we'd say, aftermarket spindles that you can get out there that you can potentially put on the pedal body of a Wahoo pedal, but they're not really selling the widths that they used to. There was also some...
I may add that some these new Favero Asioma pedal, they have a wider. Yes. So if people are buying power meter based pedal, they must take a look at this, because they might buy a different spindle length of a pedal when they choose their power meter.
Yeah. I had this discussion with a client of mine just last week, Guillaume, and they talked about, they needed a wider base of stance by about 1 centimeter per side, and there are not good options right now for them. So I said, you could try this one pedal, this power pedal, because that's going to give us about 1 centimeter wider. And they're like, why am I going to spend $800 on power pedals? I don't need power, don't want power. I don't want to spend $800 on pedals. End of question. So even though it's a great option, if we need that specific width, the cost is delivered at probably much higher than the averaging population is willing to put out.
Would you be able to? Would you be willing to give us a percentage of clients in which you recommend going with a longer pedal spindle, just to tell us a bit about the bell curve distribution? For me, it's like it's not that much. Like it's very not often.
It's not, but it's usually the people who are picking up cycling at a later age, who are not as flexible, who are larger people, who are trying to drop some of the weight that they'd gained from sitting at a desk for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And so it's typically those people. They're the people who are usually over 5'10", and who are about 200 pounds or so. Yeah. Forgive me my metric conversions, but they're typically these larger people trying to fit on bikes that are intended for skinny little Italian, Spaniards, French. There's no one skinny in the U.S. Very few people are skinny in the U.S., Eric, which is partially true.
Yeah, Eric, just to let you know, thank you so much for your time. It was a great 90-minute conversation, which will be available on YouTube for the whole length, but we will crop this into little small bites, more digestible parts of bike fitting discussion. Before people leave this conversation, I think they must not forget to change their cleat when they are done. It's a very good example of a situation when the cleat is no longer able to do his job. So don't forget.
That's right. Safely keeping you attached to the pedal.
Hopefully.
And that's yeah, I mean, that's the thing. So know when to say when, so to speak. And the cleat on that one side that looks horribly worn down is horribly worn down. So when those get too worn down, they fracture and your foot comes flying off the pedal. And it's a bad, it'll cause you to crash. It's not safe. So
stay safe.
Stay safe. Make good decisions. Thank
you so much, Eric.
Always a pleasure.